What if the very qualities that ought to keep someone far from authority are the same ones that most often propel them into positions of immense influence? Step into any boardroom or political hall, and there's a fair chance the individual calling the shots might be the least qualified to bear that weight, not due to a lack of credentials, but because the traits that secure power and the ones required to wield it with wisdom are rarely the same. Consider how many times you've seen leaders admired not for their thoughtfulness, but for their certainty, not for honesty, but for spectacle, not for substance, but for shine. Take a long look at the systems that shape our society, governments, corporations, institutions, and you'll begin to see a recurring structure. Again and again, the faces that rise to the top carry a pattern. Think about Richard Nixon. He reached the summit of American political life with intellect, savvy, and an unshakable will. Yet those very strengths came coupled with a dangerous sense of suspicion and a willingness to manipulate reality, traits that ultimately led him to disgrace. The very mindset that helped him climb the mountain also set the stage for his fall. Half a millennium before Watergate, Niccolo Machiavelli, observing the ruthless theatre of Renaissance Italy, saw this contradiction play out endlessly. In his most provocative text, The Prince, he pointed out a chilling truth. People are more easily moved by what they see than by what is truly there. He wasn't encouraging deceit for deceit's sake. He was simply recognizing a deep quirk in human perception. We respond more strongly to appearance than to essence. We don't just follow those who know the path, we follow those who act as if they do, even when they're just as lost as the rest of us. Modern psychology has only confirmed what Machiavelli sensed in his bones. Studies published in respected academic journals show that those who project unwavering confidence, even when they're wrong, are often regarded as more capable than those who speak carefully, acknowledge complexity, or express doubt. In short, we mistake certainty for competence, and so the loudest voice in the room often wins, even if that voice is steering everyone in the wrong direction. Imagine a scenario. A group of people are stranded in unfamiliar terrain. Two individuals step forward. One admits the situation is complicated, that there are various possible ways forward, each with its risks. The other insists, without hesitation, that they know exactly what to do. It doesn't take a psychologist to guess which person the group is more likely to follow. That instant magnetism of certainty draws people in, even if the assured voice has no better idea than anyone else. It's not that the group is foolish, it's that our minds are wired to crave stability, especially when things feel uncertain. This tendency has massive implications for leadership. A broad study analyzing dozens of research papers found that individuals with narcissistic tendencies, those with an inflated sense of self-importance, a flair for self-promotion, and a hunger for admiration, are more likely to be chosen as leaders. Yet the traits that make them rise don't necessarily make them succeed. In fact, the companies they lead tend to experience greater swings in performance and face sharper backlash when risky strategies fall apart. Look at Adam Neumann, the former head of WeWork. He convinced investors that his shared office empire was worth nearly $50 billion, despite staggering financial losses. He captivated audiences with a revolutionary vision and limitless self-belief. Yet behind the confidence was a business model on shaky legs. When the truth caught up, the empire cracked and the company's value plummeted by over 80%. In the end, the boldness that built the brand also contributed to its unraveling. So why do we keep falling for this? The answer lies in our psychological wiring. Confidence triggers admiration. Bold declarations, even when false, activate our instinct to follow. In uncertain times, we lean toward the person who seems most sure of themselves, even if that assurance is completely detached from reality. It's a paradox of perception. We trust the performance of leadership more than the practice of it. Machiavelli captured this duality in a single line. People remember grand acts and bold gestures more than quiet integrity or careful decisions. He understood that theatrics often matter more than truth in the game of influence. And yet, there are stories that break this mold, leaders who rise without spectacle and guide without ego. Take the example of Seretse Khama, the founding president of Botswana. After independence, many African nations slipped into chaos, authoritarianism, or kleptocracy. But under Khama's quiet and steady guidance, Botswana grew into one of the continent's most stable and prosperous democracies. He didn't build a cult of personality. He didn't chase grandeur. Instead, he built institutions, practiced restraint, and governed with humility. During his time, the nation's economy expanded exponentially, and life expectancy climbed dramatically. His legacy wasn't built on promises, it was built on delivery. This shows us something important. While arrogance may help win the crown, character determines what you do with it. Leadership isn't just about rising, it's about what you carry with you once you're at the top. The qualities that help someone gain control, bravado, self-assurance, charisma, can become liabilities once that power is in hand. Machiavelli once wrote that although people praise leaders who are honest and fair, history teaches that those who achieve the most often rely on subtle tricks, persuasion, and tactical misdirection. Again, this wasn't a celebration of dishonesty. It was a reflection on how leadership often demands a level of strategic cunning. Think of it less like a lie and more like a sleight of hand. Just like a magician distracts you with a flashy movement while the real trick happens elsewhere, many powerful figures focus public attention on what they want seen, not on what matters most. This isn't always sinister. Sometimes framing a challenge in a more optimistic light can genuinely help people rally during hard times. Psychological studies reveal that leaders who present difficult news with a hopeful spin can actually increase team morale and productivity, even when the facts remain tough. In this way, shaping perception becomes not just a tactic, but a tool for navigating complex human dynamics. Yet when manipulation turns inward, when leaders begin believing their own myths, trouble escalates. A recent study found that as people ascend in power, they're more likely to deceive themselves. The story they tell the world becomes the story they begin to believe, even when it no longer aligns with reality. This internal self-deception creates a feedback loop. The more power they gain, the less they question themselves, and the less feedback they accept. Eventually, they live in a bubble where critique is silenced, and their own version of the world becomes their gospel truth. Machiavelli had another timeless insight. If you want to gauge a leader's wisdom, look at the people they surround themselves with. Strong leaders gather capable, critical thinkers. Weak ones collect flatterers and yes-men. But here's where the twist lies. Sometimes, seeming less intellectual or more relatable actually wins public favor. In politics, this is often called the beer test. Voters often prefer the candidate who feels like someone you'd enjoy chatting with over one who seems too cerebral or distant. This doesn't mean people don't value intelligence. It means they value connection even more. Psychologists call this the pratfall effect. It's the idea that highly capable people who show a minor flaw or present themselves in a simple way become more likable. That's why you sometimes see brilliant individuals softening their speech, simplifying their ideas, or making small, intentional mistakes. It builds rapport. It humanizes them. But there's a cost. In a world where simple sound bites win attention, complexity often loses, and yet leadership is nothing if not complex. George W. Bush's presidency provides an interesting lens. Despite his Ivy League education, he crafted a communication style that emphasized folksiness and straightforward language. Many found this disarming and approachable. But it also drew criticism, with opponents questioning whether his simplicity masked a lack of depth. This tension between clarity and oversimplification is one that every leader must navigate. It's worth noting that humans dislike ambiguity. Our minds prefer clean narratives, tidy explanations, and firm answers. That's why leaders who present absolute certainty often appear stronger, even when the world they describe is far messier than they let on. A massive study on corporate leadership found that CEOs who used more basic language were more likely to be hired and received higher initial pay. But here's the catch. They also performed worse in situations that demanded complex analysis or nuanced thinking. Machiavelli argued that a leader should focus on the arts of war, not just in the literal sense, but in mastering what seems concrete, measurable, and decisive. He believed rulers should appear action-oriented and unshakable. The implication? Those who admit the existence of uncertainty, who present a full and honest picture, may come across as weak, even if they're the ones truly grappling with reality. This introduces a subtle but serious flaw in how leaders are chosen. People who understand the intricacies of an issue, who hesitate before making sweeping declarations, often seem indecisive. Meanwhile, those who charge ahead with conviction, however misplaced, appear ready to lead. And so we reward boldness and penalize thoughtfulness. Even virtues like compassion can create challenges for those in power. Machiavelli famously stated that if a ruler must choose, it's better to be feared than loved. He wasn't endorsing cruelty. He was pointing to a difficult truth. Kindness, when unchecked, can sometimes get in the way of necessary action. Modern neuroscience backs this up. Powerful individuals tend to show less activity in the parts of the brain responsible for empathy. It's not always because they're cold. It may be an adaptation. Like a surgeon must remain detached to do their job, a leader may need distance to make hard decisions. This is a tricky balance. Empathy is essential for moral leadership, but too much can paralyze action. Leaders who carry the pain of others too deeply may hesitate when they need to act decisively. And those who feel less, who can compartmentalize or disconnect, often appear more composed and are therefore more likely to be seen as strong. This edge often gives narcissistic personalities a leg up. They tend to project calm, clarity, and control, especially under pressure. In group dynamics, these traits are magnetic. Experiments have shown that in team settings, people with narcissistic traits are significantly more likely to be picked as leaders, even when others in the group are better qualified. When people are asked to choose who should take charge, they often unconsciously drift toward the person who seems most certain, not the one who has demonstrated actual skill or integrity. That certainty, when unearned, becomes dangerous. It gives power to the person who has mastered performance, not practice. It prioritizes a costume of strength over the backbone of wisdom. Machiavelli once made a startling observation. Even leaders praised for being virtuous often accomplish the most through cunning rather than compassion. This isn't a claim that deceit is moral. It's a recognition that in the arena of influence, perception outweighs honesty more often than not, and the distortion isn't always malicious. Sometimes, what's dangerous isn't the lie a leader tells the public, but the comforting fiction they start whispering to themselves. Self-deception is one of the most insidious effects of power. A recent behavioral study found that the more authority a person gains, the more likely they are to believe in their own narrative, even if it's no longer anchored in truth. Power doesn't just corrupt, it insulates. Feedback becomes filtered. Criticism dries up. A leader may begin genuinely believing that their every instinct is correct because they no longer hear anything to the contrary. This isn't a new phenomenon. Machiavelli, keenly aware of how influence twists the mind, believed the best way to assess a ruler's judgment was by examining the people around them. Competent advisors are a sign of strength, sycophants a signal of deep insecurity. But this exposes another layer of complexity. We often favor leaders who present themselves as relatable over those who surround themselves with brilliance. Think of the everyman appeal that dominates modern politics. Candidates who present themselves as humble, uncomplicated, and folksy often gain public support faster than those who appear too educated or too polished. It's not about whether they are relatable, but whether they seem like someone you'd feel comfortable having a casual chat with. This dynamic, known in psychology as the relatability bias, often works against thoughtful, detail-oriented individuals who struggle to translate complexity into digestible sound bites. It's not that voters or constituents don't appreciate intelligence. It's that clarity, even if it's false, is easier to digest than nuanced truth. The person who says, "I know exactly what to do," sounds reassuring, even if they're bluffing. The one who explains the difficulties, who outlines various paths and their consequences, might be more accurate, but will often be perceived as weak or indecisive. And this gets to the heart of what we can call the leadership illusion. That powerful misconception that decisiveness is always a virtue, and that complexity is a weakness. The reality is that many of the world's most urgent problems, climate change, economic inequality, systemic injustice, require delicate, multifaceted solutions. Yet the leaders most likely to succeed in being chosen are those who simplify everything into a binary choice. Right versus wrong, us versus them, progress versus failure. But nuance rarely goes viral. Simplicity, certainty, and charisma are the currencies of modern influence, and so we reward the show more than the substance. Consider Angela Merkel, the long-serving German Chancellor. She governed during times of massive upheaval, from the Eurozone crisis to the refugee influx, and yet her greatest strength was not grandeur, it was patience. She was measured, analytical, and cautious, and for years she faced criticism for not being bold enough. But it was that same restraint that made her an anchor during storms. She led by refusing to indulge theatrics. She wasn't the loudest voice, but often the most grounded. This illustrates an essential truth. Sometimes the best leaders are those who hesitate before making decisions, not because they're unsure, but because they understand the weight of their choices. They calculate, they consider, and they sacrifice popularity for prudence. Contrast this with models of leadership where image overrides everything, where branding is more carefully managed than actual policy, where carefully lit photo ops matter more than substance. Many modern leaders now have entire teams devoted to managing their personal brand. Every post, every appearance, every word is sculpted, not to reflect truth, but to maintain power. This branding approach isn't limited to politics. In business, it's become commonplace. CEOs are now expected to be visionaries, public speakers, influencers. Shareholders don't just want financial growth, they want a narrative, a mythos, a brand hero. And this can be dangerous, because a myth doesn't need to be true. It just needs to be compelling. That's why even failed business leaders often land on their feet. If they sell the right story, if they embody the right kind of certainty, they'll be handed another opportunity, another startup, another stage. So how do we fix this? If our instincts are biased, if our systems reward illusion over integrity, how can we ensure that those who gain power are actually fit to use it wisely? The answer may lie in reshaping the environments in which leaders operate. Rather than endlessly searching for the perfect leader, a mythical figure who is both virtuous and effective, We can design structures that reduce the damage flawed individuals can cause. This is exactly what the framers of the United States Constitution understood. James Madison once wrote, "If men were angels, no government would be necessary." He didn't assume leaders would be wise. Instead, he built a system that would function even when they weren't. Checks and balances, term limits, independent courts, a network of accountability designed not for saints, but for fallible human beings. Machiavelli would have appreciated that kind of realism. He knew that no leader could embody all virtues all the time. Instead of pretending that every prince could be righteous, he focused on how power could be navigated intelligently, through strategy, restraint, and adaptability. He believed that sometimes a leader had to embody the fox who sees the trap and the lion who wards off the attacker. The key in his mind was to use each persona in its proper place, and that's where our focus should shift. Not on demanding leaders be perfect, but on ensuring they are surrounded by systems that encourage honesty, humility, and accountability. Imagine if corporate boards prioritize consistent, data-backed results over charismatic presentation. Imagine if voters rewarded thoughtfulness rather than slogans. Imagine if institutions emphasized collaborative leadership rather than individual dominance. Some companies are already trying. Bridgewater Associates, for example, pioneered a system called radical transparency. In their culture, every decision, including those of the CEO, can be challenged by anyone. Performance is reviewed openly. Feedback flows in all directions. It's not always comfortable, but it drastically reduces the chance that a narcissistic leader can operate unchecked. Other organizations have experimented with anonymous feedback mechanisms, term limits for executives, and structural separation between decision makers and approvers. These are not perfect solutions, but they represent a new way of thinking, that power must be observed, questioned, and contained, not blindly trusted. Because the greatest danger isn't always the tyrant who grabs control. Sometimes it's the smiling leader who slowly stops listening, the one who builds a bubble so thick with praise and perception that no truth can get through. And that's where we come in, not just as citizens or employees, but as participants in the ongoing drama of leadership selection. If we want better leaders, we must become better judges of character. That means educating ourselves on the psychological tricks we're most vulnerable to, understanding the difference between charisma and character, learning to recognize when confidence masks ignorance or when simplicity conceals evasion. It also means choosing not to reward performance over principle. In every election, every hiring process, every group project, there's a chance to notice who actually listens, who actually learns, who actually delivers. These are the people who may not dazzle at first glance, but who build trust one honest act at a time. Leadership isn't just about making grand speeches or bold decisions. It's about holding the weight of other people's futures in your hands and knowing how to carry that weight without breaking or breaking others. And sometimes the person best suited for that task is the one who speaks softly, who hesitates, who doesn't crave the spotlight. Nelson Mandela didn't seek power for power's sake. He emerged from decades of confinement, not with bitterness, but with clarity. His leadership was grounded not in domination, but in dignity. Abraham Lincoln, awkward and unrefined by the standards of his time, led with immense emotional intelligence during a national fracture. These were not Machiavellian in the way the word is commonly used, but they understood human nature deeply and used that understanding to unify, not manipulate. The truth is, many of the most transformative leaders do not fit the mold, and that's why the mold needs to be broken. We must stop selecting leaders the same way we choose actors, based on presence, tone, and posture. Leadership is not a performance, it's a responsibility. And when we confuse the two, we pay the price. But it's not all grim, because if perception can be manipulated, it can also be reshaped. If systems reward spectacle, they can be redesigned to reward substance. If our instincts are flawed, they can be trained. We are not stuck with the patterns of the past. We can shift our culture toward valuing thoughtful speech over flashy rhetoric, steady hands over dramatic gestures, accountability over applause. Machiavelli didn't just describe the darkness of power. He illuminated it in hopes that we might navigate it more wisely. He didn't say the prince had to be cruel, only that in a world shaped by human psychology, a leader must understand the forces at play. That understanding is our responsibility too. So next time you hear someone say, "He just sounds like a leader," ask why. Is it because of what he says or how he says it? Is it because he's proven or just persuasive? Because the future doesn't belong to the most confident voice. It belongs to those who can carry the weight of that confidence with care, with wisdom, and with truth. And maybe, just maybe, if we start listening more closely, really listening, we'll stop confusing the echo of power with its essence. Until then, in a world that keeps crowning performers, may we become wise enough to recognize those who lead not with spectacle, but with substance.